I choose to break the silence as part of my coping with the conflict between my actions on behalf of the military and my conscience as a human being. There is this conception that being a good person and being a good soldier go hand in hand, but I don't think our society is really aware of what being a good soldier really means.
Welcome back. That's what another soldier had to say about his reasons for breaking his silence. Let's hear now from another soldier with an opposing view. Joining us is Hen Mazzig. Hen was a former humanitarian officer in the Israeli Defense Forces, and now he's the Israel Education Director for another non-profit. Stand with us. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Hen, thanks for your time. What do you make of groups like Breaking the Silence and what they say their mission is?
Well, I think that to understand what group mission really is, you need to look at the funding. And the funding, the funding of Breaking the Silence comes from bodies that are clearly anti-Israel, that are promoting a delegitimization campaign against Israel. And hundreds of thousands of euros are being poured into this organization from these bodies with a clear agenda. And I think this is why we see the soldiers expressing themselves in the way they are. Once again, Breaking the Silence are claiming to have approximately 1,000 testimonies. I haven't seen all of them, but even if they have 1,000 testimonies, it's still less than 0.5% of the Israeli soldiers in reserve and in duty, and it does not represent the Israeli army, and that's why they are conceived as such a fringe extreme group also in Israel. I mean, the Israeli society do not accept them. Everyone in the Israeli society went through the military service, and we know what's really going on in the military, in the IDF, in the Israeli Defense Force, and their testimonies are most of the time misrepresentation of the IDF, and in worst cases are even lying.
Notwithstanding where their finances come from and the fact that they may only constitute a small percentage, as you point out, of the entire Israeli Defense Force numbers, do they not have voices, though, that need to be heard, not just around the world, but particularly in Israel?
Definitely. I think that in Israel, their work is very important. I think it's unfortunate that 80% of their lectures are being done in foreign languages. I think their focus should be Israel. I think that they need to speak to Israelis, and they need to keep on bringing their voice here as part of the vibrant discussion in Israel, which is a democracy. That's why they are able to do their work that they are doing. That is important. We need to. The Israeli army is self-criticizing. It's criticizing itself all the time. There are committees that are investigating after each and every war. Even Judge Goldstone that was responsible for the report after Cass led the war with Gaza, that was appointed by the United Nations. After criticizing Israel, he retracted his criticism, saying that Israel has done the most to investigate itself, as we're doing all the time. And it's important to have their voice in Israel, but it's unfortunate that they are focusing on bashing Israel throughout the world and taint the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli army in the way that they are.
Right, you say bashing Israel and tainting Israeli soldiers. I mean, we just spoke a moment ago to Avner Varyahu, who is a member of Breaking the Silence. He is in the United States, and this is what he told us. I mean, he said he's a patriotic Israeli, loves his country, but he wants to bring the world's attention and Israel's attention to what is going on in the occupied territories. He blames the government. He says he wants a debate. What's wrong with that?
Nothing is wrong about it. I mean, I heard it before by activists that are involved with this group that are saying, we love Israel like we love our sister and we want our sister to get better. But if you want your sister to get better, you're not going to go around telling everyone how horrible she is. You're going to work with her. So to go around the world and to be celebrated for alleged war crimes that they have conducted, and again, they are being celebrated, which is beyond my understanding. I mean, I served in the IDF for 5 years. I served in Hebron. In the recent war, I was the head of the International Humanitarian Operation Room that we started to help the Palestinians in Gaza to make sure that there's enough international aid coming in and that their needs are being taken care of. I've seen the IDF going to such length to protect Palestinian human rights. So it is important to do it, but I think that the way that they are doing it suggests other goals rather than changing the Israeli army. If they were if the quote that you read in the beginning of the segment was moving, but yet if you have problem with your conscience, you can go to any police station and turn yourself in. I'm sure that the Israeli police would arrest them and help them deal with with the conscious issues that they have. So for me, I question the motives of this group, and the funding, this huge sum of money that goes into this group is something that should raise a lot of question marks for everyone.
I want to play you another recording. This is testimony from another soldier, and I want to get your response to it at the end of that. Let's take a listen to this.
The rules of engagement are any person at a distance that can put you at risk, you kill him with no need for clearance, meaning anyone at a distance of 200, 300, 400 meters from us isn't an ordinary citizen. According to IDF logic, he must be there for a reason because an ordinary citizen would flee the area, so we must kill him with no need for clearance.
So here we have a soldier who's talking about battlefield conditions, talking about the rules of engagement, talking about the split-second decisions that a soldier has to make while out there in the battlefield. And when you hear something like that, when we hear those sentiments that were just expressed by that soldier, what is the effect? What do you hear?
I hear something very weird, and again, it's very strange to me because I served in the army. I sent soldiers to prison when they misbehaved, when they have done things that are abnormal and are not as I expect them to do. Part of the work that I've done as a humanitarian officer, that my unit, COGAT, the Coordinator of Government Activities in the Territories, you can read more online about us. But part of our job was also to train soldiers on the international law, on the Geneva Convention, on rules of engagement. They have to know what they can do and what they cannot do. I think that Colonel Richard Camp, the commander of the British Armed Forces in Afghanistan, said that working with the Israeli army, he never saw an army that takes care of human rights as the Israeli army. And I'll quote him saying that the Israeli army is the most moral army in the world, and that comes from a British colonel. So I know from my experience that what I've seen, what I've done was completely different than anything that I'm hearing from Breaking the Silence. My work was just focused on helping the Palestinians. And you know what, to be honest, I have seen some human rights violations. I've seen human rights violations of Palestinians that has been conducted by the Palestinian Authority, by the Palestinian security forces that are beating Palestinians, arresting them in the most horrific ways that you can imagine. I've seen Hamas in Gaza dragging gays down the street, while here in Israel we are celebrating 40 years of gay rights. In Gaza it's impossible to be gay. Women oppression. We see this horrible acts of barbarism against human beings, and breaking the silence instead of talking about these issues, instead of talking about the real issue, the oppression of Palestinians throughout the Middle East, in Iraq, in Lebanon. There's one group, there's one military that actually uphold Palestinian human rights, and it's the only one in the Middle East. It's the IDF, it's the Israeli Defense Force that is doing days and nights to help the Palestinians and to make sure that their life will be better.
Right.
And we are being criticized and bashed for it.
What about the fact that, Avner also told us that he has no problem with Israel. He has no problem with the Israeli Defense Force. In fact, he told us that he's patriotic. He loves his country. But when we look at some of the statements, and some may consider these very inflammatory statements made by Israeli ministers. We had a statement made by Naftali Bennett, who was a senior Israeli minister, who said, I've killed lots of Arabs in my life, and there's no problem with that. The foreign minister, Avigdor Lieberman, said Arabs who are not loyal to Israel should have their heads chopped off with an axe. When ministers make statements like that, you have young, impressionable soldiers out there in the battlefield. What kind of message does it send to them?
This is part of a democracy. You hear those. It's a vibrant democracy in Israel, so you hear many opinions, and I don't think that this is. When I was a commander, I made it very clear that there's no room for politics. We are an army, and we are doing what the government is telling us to do, what the chief of staff is telling us to do. But we have moral laws, and we have moral code, and we have rules of engagements, and we're following them. So I think that although there's, just like in any other country, I'm sure that I can find some quotes from the U.S. senators and U.S. Representatives that are making statements that are not easy to hear, but it doesn't represent the Israeli government, doesn't represent the Israeli army that it is doing its best to uphold Palestinian human rights, to defend the life of Palestinians. Personally, myself, I saved the lives of hundreds of Palestinians. I work to help the Palestinians create a better future for themselves. And this is a unit that the IDF has, a unit of thousands of soldiers that our job is to uphold those Palestinian human rights. So, and again, it's really troubling for me to see an organization like Breaking the Silence and soldiers that are self-proclaimed war criminals being paraded and celebrated around the world for their war crimes. There's something, I think it's a deep problem that, and I'm sure, you know, just like in any other army, there are bad apples, but there's a problem here that we are talking about Israel. I think it's deeper than what we see on the surface. I don't think it's about the conduct of Israel, of what the Israeli army has done or hasn't done. There's a rooted problem with this obsession with the Jewish state, and this is something that we need to think about. Okay, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv. And that's all we have time for, but the conversation continues. You can always chat with us on Twitter at @CCTV_America, or send us your comments to theheat@cctv-america.com. I'm Arnold Nader in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.